Hello guys, this is Real Recaps. In this video, I will talk about a 2023 Philippine horror film, Kampon. Before we start, I hope you will like and subscribe to the channel. The movie begins with Ranulfo taking his ailing sister, Loretta, to a shaman named Almera. Almera performs a series of prayers over Loretta and gives her a drink. Soon after, a blue liquid begins to pour from Loretta's mouth, and despite her intense suffering, she passes away. Ranulfo, devastated by this outcome, laments that he had brought his sister to Almera to save her, not to lose her. In response, Almera extinguishes the candles and drapes cloths over the idols in her room, declaring that there may be another way. She commences a ritual, during which the room's lights flicker, and the draped idols begin to move. Loretta's body starts to twitch, levitates mid-air, and eventually returns to the bed. A strange symbol forms on her stomach, and she unexpectedly regains consciousness. The story shifts to Eileen and her husband, Clark, attending a baptism ceremony at a church for their friends Janet and Bob's son, Anton. During the gathering, Bob casually asks if they are planning to have children, but they avoid answering. The next day, Eileen visits her father, Luis, in the hospital. She reassures him that once he recovers, she will have Luth prepare his favorite gallows dish. Luis responds by moving his fingers, and Eileen is overjoyed at this sign of recovery. However, he suddenly tells her that he doesn't need her, and his condition deteriorates rapidly. Despite her attempts to summon help, Luis passes away. Eileen confides in Clark afterward, expressing how she knew this moment was inevitable but is left with unanswered questions. Clark comforts her, explaining that her father likely wasn't in his right mind when he spoke, urging her not to take his words to heart. Eileen reflects on how her father cared for her after her mother's death and feels guilty for failing to take care of him. She laments her inability to give Clark a child, and he reassures her that parenting isn't a requirement of love. A few days later, Eileen attends her friend Rona's daughter Julia's birthday party. Amid the celebration, Julia throws a tantrum, demanding mermaids instead of animals or magicians. Rona, embarrassed, tells Eileen that she's lucky not to deal with such headaches. Rona comments on Eileen's seemingly peaceful and financially comfortable life and inquires if she has considered options like IVF or adoption. Eileen admits they've tried everything, but Clark has unresolved issues. Rona advises her to manifest a child and ensure they both genuinely desire it. As they converse, a mysterious man observes Eileen from a distance. In a flashback, Clark, on duty, investigates eerie howling noises coming from a container. Inside the dark container, he and his team discover a terrifying creature in a cage that lets out a blood-curdling scream. Clark then wakes up in his bedroom, finding Eileen on the balcony. She expresses hope that their next attempt with Dr. Lester might succeed. Clark, however, reminds her of the financial strain caused by previous treatments. Eileen shares that her late father left some money, and Rona believes their shared desire could make it happen. Clark questions whether their happiness as a couple is enough. Later that night, the doorbell rings, waking Eileen. Clark answers the door to find a little girl standing outside. Confused, he asks her identity, but Eileen arrives, and the girl hands her a note with the name Jade written on it. Eileen brings Jade inside and asks Clark to fetch a towel. Clark discovers photos in Jade's bag and asks how she bypassed their gated home. Jade cryptically responds that she was searching for him and calls him Colonel Clark Martinez. When Clark denies being a cop anymore, Jade says her mother sent her to find him. She then claims that Clark is her father. Shocked, Clark insists it's impossible, but Eileen seems uncertain. The next day, they take Jade to the police station. Colonel Jake shows Jade some photographs, and she identifies a woman in them as her mother, Almera. Jade mentions she is hungry, and while Eileen takes her to buy food, Jade wanders off. Meanwhile, Clark confesses to Jake that he doubts Jade's claim because he and Eileen struggle with infertility. Jake suggests a DNA test for clarity. Elsewhere in the station, Jade encounters a prisoner and eerily predicts his future death. Eileen finds Jade and brings her back, and Jade calls her Mommy, leaving Eileen visibly shaken. Eileen convinces Clark to let Jade stay temporarily, reasoning that she has nowhere else to go and their home is secure. That evening, Clark hears whispers from Jade's room but finds her asleep. After he leaves, Jade begins chanting in her sleep. At the same time, an entity chants similar words near Loretta's lifeless body. The next day, Clark reviews old photos, spotting a woman he had an affair with in the background. Distracted, he notices a figure staring at him from a nearby building. When his phone rings, it's Manuel from Child Services, but when Clark looks back, the figure is gone. Meanwhile, Eileen questions Jade about her search for Clark. Jade responds that her mother claimed he could help find her a home. That night, Jade approaches a sleeping Eileen, chanting something that causes Eileen to murmur the same words in her sleep. Clark wakes up to see a shadowy figure over Eileen and instinctively points a gun, only to realize it's Jade. Eileen defends Jade, insisting she's just a child. The next morning, Jade remarks that her mother often spoke of Clark's skill at keeping secrets, implying she might be his secret. Frustrated, Clark denies knowing her mother and accuses Jade of trying to manipulate him. He informs her that Child Services will resolve the matter, but Jade cryptically says he's the only one missing. Later, Rona tells Eileen she'd never tolerate such a situation in her marriage. Eileen defends Jade, arguing that the police investigation is ongoing and the child has no other support. During this, Julia sees Jade jump from a balcony and alerts her mother, but they find Jade unharmed below. In a chilling scene, Jade revives a dead bird, impressing Julia, only to kill it in front of her. A flashback reveals Clark's harrowing encounter with the escaped entity, which slaughtered his team before Jake intervened, saving his life. Jake informs Clark that he is not sterile, but Clark finds this hard to believe. He mentions that all the doctors they visited confirmed his sterility, questioning how Jade could be his daughter. Jake probes further, asking where Clark might have been involved with Loretta. Clark admits it happened in Marinduque in 2016 when Loretta worked as a waitress for his first client. When Jake inquires about Clark and Eileen's marriage, Clark states it took place in 2015. Jake speculates that Clark might have become sterile after fathering Jade and jokingly suggests Loretta cursed him for his actions. He then asks how Eileen is coping with Jade's presence, and Clark confesses that Eileen sometimes treats Jade like her own child. Jake advises Clark to come clean to Eileen, suggesting she might forgive him and that Jade could become an instant daughter for them. Later, Clark notices a man watching him and furiously confronts him. He beats the man on the road, but the man laughs eerily. Jake steps in to stop Clark, but Clark pushes him away and continues attacking. The police soon arrive, and Clark is horrified when he sees the man's face. Amid the confusion, the man escapes. Clark is subsequently arrested, and Jake reminds him he is no longer a cop and shouldn't act recklessly. Jake asks who the man was, and Clark explains that he's been stalked by several people, first a child, then a young woman, and now this man. He describes them as resembling members of a cult. Jake dismisses his fears, suggesting Clark is paranoid, especially since Jade's arrival. While in jail, a fellow prisoner approaches Clark and warns him about Jade. He cryptically states that Jade has the tongue of an angel but the hands of the devil. When Clark asks how he knows Jade, the man claims the girl is possessed. Meanwhile, Eileen has a disturbing experience at home. She dreams of Jade jumping on a bed and touching the ceiling, levitating in the air. This vision escalates when she hears laughter and sees her deceased father playing with Jade. Eileen's father accuses her of deciding to have a child only after his death. The scene becomes even more surreal when family and friends appear, declaring that Jade is not hers. Eileen notices blood on her stomach and sees a demonic fetus before waking up from her nightmare. Eileen eventually discovers that Jade is Clark's biological daughter. When confronted, Clark admits it was a one-time mistake when he was drunk. Eileen is hurt, pointing out that Clark had blamed her when he thought he was sterile. She expresses frustration, saying it would have been easier if Jade's existence explained their infertility. Clark apologizes, denying any further secrets, but Eileen remains cold. Later, Clark tries to reconcile, but Eileen's aloofness frustrates him. During an eerie moment, Eileen's demeanor shifts unnaturally, terrifying Clark. Meanwhile, a man named Manuel from Child Services arrives but is attacked and killed by one of the undead. Separately, Jake investigates Loretta's background and discovers she was one of the passengers in a bus crash. The accident occurred in Playa del Bulacán, where the bus plunged into a valley, killing all on board. Loretta, her brother, and Jade were listed among the passengers, but their bodies were never recovered. Jake shares this information with Clark and suggests they visit the crash site. Unbeknownst to Clark, Jade is watching him from the ceiling. Clark later spots a suspicious man and woman on his CCTV feed. He rushes out to confront them but is distracted when Jake leaves the police station. At that moment, Joe Pat enters and kills a prisoner, fulfilling a cryptic prophecy about the date, March 22nd. Meanwhile, Jade observes Clark's actions with a sinister smile. A flashback reveals the bus crash that killed Loretta and her brother. Jade, the sole survivor, is seen reviving the dead passengers, including Loretta and her brother, using supernatural powers. These resurrected individuals appear as undead entities. Back at the house, Clark finds Eileen breastfeeding Jade. Eileen reveals she is lactating, which shocks Clark. She then shares the news that she is pregnant, leaving Clark in disbelief. Eileen suggests that after everything involving Loretta, nothing seems impossible. Suddenly, undead figures, including Ranulfo, Loretta's brother, attack Clark. They overpower him, and Eileen is taken away. Jake arrives at Clark's home, sensing danger, and calls for backup. In a gruesome scene, Loretta's mutilated body is shown still breathing as part of an ongoing ritual. Clark awakens tied to a tree and sees Jade orchestrating a ceremony involving Eileen. Jake tries to rescue Clark but is killed in a horrific manner. Clark approaches Jade in a desperate attempt to rescue Eileen, but the undead start advancing toward him. In a startling turn, Jade uses her powers to make their heads explode, simply by moving her hands, a manifestation of her connection to Clark as her father. Confronting Jade, Clark demands to know why she is doing this and what she has done to Eileen. Jade calmly replies that now, Mommy can come back, and they can finally be together as a family. Determined to end the chaos, Clark declares to end things and shoots Loretta's body. As Jade weeps for her mother, Clark seizes the opportunity to rush to Eileen and attempts to carry her to safety. However, Eileen's body begins convulsing violently, forcing Clark to lay her back down. Despite his efforts to revive her, Eileen loses consciousness once again. At this moment, Ranulfo, Loretta's brother, fatally shoots Clark. Clark, gravely injured, sees Jade standing before him. Reaching out to her, he hopes to make contact, but what he perceives horrifies him. Jade's form transforms into a sinister entity. Overcome with terror and pain, Clark succumbs and dies in agony. Eileen abruptly regains consciousness and is met by Jade, who approaches her, addressing her as Mommy. Struggling to her feet, Eileen begins following Jade. As she walks, she feels intense pain in her abdomen and notices the outline of an incomplete symbol forming on her stomach. She eventually reaches Jade, who hands her Jake's car keys. As they walk together, Jade cryptically remarks that she now feels whole again. When Eileen asks about Clark, Jade cryptically replies that he didn't want to join them. The pair drive off to start a new life, leaving behind the still breathing body of Loretta, signifying the unfinished ritual.